welcome to Bermuda's News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and with me tonight are three members of the One Bermuda Alliance who will be discussing this year's throne budget. We have Scott Pearman, welcome.
Good evening, Don.
Ben Smith, welcome.
Good evening, Don.
And the rose amongst the three thorns tonight, Susan Jackson.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. So let's start with your initial thoughts to this year's throne speech. And Ben, we're going to start with you.
So the first thing that we noticed was that the throne speech just didn't have a lot in it. It was a much shorter speech. That was the first thing that we noticed. And to be honest with you, with the situation that the country's been in, the anxiety of the country, with what we've been dealing with COVID, the impact it's had on our economy, we just expected more. We expected more details. We expected to see, that we had a real plan and not just something that gave some ideas, but didn't tell us how we were going to get it done and how we were going to pay for the things that we need to get done. So that was our initial thought.
Okay, Susan?
Well, for me, the idea that there's, a cultural change that needs to take place was the overall theme of the throne this year. And it's going to be a heavy lift. And I just am very cognizant of the fact that the government has committed to changing the culture. And it's going to take an awful lot of work and an awful lot of changes to legislation, et cetera, to bring about that change. So it's a real challenge for the government. And, I'm hoping that they'll be able to find some solution at the end of it.
Okay. Now, we'll start with one of the bigger topics is we have the closure of the Fairmont, Southampton, and Elbow Beach. The Fairmont, Southampton had more than 2% of our workforce. And then, of course, there's the knock-on effect of all the other businesses that service the hotel. What should government be doing to get these tourist industry icons back up and running, and what else should they be doing to help tourism? Scott?
Well, that was one of the fundamental planks of the OBA's previous government, wasn't it? It was an attempt to try to rebuild and revitalize, and also, importantly, refinance the various tourist destinations that we had. You saw that with a major overhaul of the Hamilton Princess Hotel. You saw that with the St. Regis, which is actually now built and operating, creating jobs for Bermudians in the East End and elsewhere. So, you need to give people the confidence to come in and spend the kind of money in the jurisdiction that they're prepared to spend. So at the moment, we haven't heard the plans. And I want to be clear, we as the opposition are supportive of the government if they can achieve the goals in getting these tourist products back up and running. We're not there to be an impediment. We want to support them. But at the moment, it's not clear where the plans are. Also, you didn't add, Don, we just heard about aerial sands. So, the proof in the pudding is in the eating, as they say.
Susan or Ben, do you guys want to add anything to that?
Well, the only thing that I would add is that on top of the America's Cup being kind of a catalyst for attracting people to Bermuda, putting Bermuda on the world stage, the OBA had kind of set the table for what could happen, right? You then follow on with the triathlon coming to Bermuda, another opportunity for the world to see what Bermuda had to offer. And we had started the moves towards attracting people to come to Bermuda, which then makes people that are thinking about opening up a hotel look at Bermuda as that kind of jurisdiction. We then follow that on by having a brand new airport to invite people to come to the country. So the pieces have been put in place. It's now up to the government to take the tools that we had set them up with and start to attract the people in that we had started to look towards getting.
Okay. The government also said in the throne speech with regard to tourism that it's requiring a far greater return from the BTA than it has delivered in the past. Your thoughts? Scott?
Well, I think we're really concerned. One of the best things, in my personal opinion, that the OBA achieved during its time in government, and I wasn't part of that government, I came along afterwards, but one of the very best things I think the OBA achieved was to take the politics out of tourism. by creating the BTA as an independent body of professionals who know how tourism works and who know how they can attract people to Bermuda and attract people to Bermuda with the money that are prepared to invest in Bermuda and in Bermudians and in our jobs. And so I'm very concerned by the tendency that we've seen in this government, and it goes back several years to the previous tourism minister, where they want to interfere with the BTA. And that's not a good idea. You know, we politicians don't have any particular expertise in tourism. Leave it to the experts. The BTA was doing a fabulous job. You know, don't mess it up. It would be my position.
Susan or Ben, do you want to say to that? Go ahead, Susan.
Yes, to pipe in from the previous question and concerning the BTA, my concern is that the tourism industry is one of our biggest employment industries. And while we're, you know, kicking the can down the road or playing political footballs with tourism, we have a large number of people who are struggling to find jobs within the industry. And we have to consider what we're going to do to either retool or to provide some form of employment for people who are skilled and experienced in tourism. So, you know, again, it's about that cultural change. We're going to have to shift something because we need to keep the industry going so that people can earn a good salary and you know, be able to afford the cost of living.
Survive.
Okay. Now, I went and looked on the airport website today just to see our daily flights, flight schedule. We have 8 flights from New York this week, no flights from Boston. And the throne speech was talking about the Ministry of Transport securing increased airlift from traditional gateway cities and increased connectivity. What do you think the reality of that is in this COVID environment? Ben?
Well, there's a couple of issues here. So the first thing that we get is the second that the flight loads go down, we are going to hear that now the revenue is having to be paid out, and that's the OBA's fault. Everybody knows that the pandemic was going to have an impact on travel around the world. One of the things that we have to start to look at is that other countries are opening up, and you're starting to see travel get back to the regular levels. But in Bermuda, we're moving in the wrong direction. At a time that we really need to start to increase our visitors so that we can get our economy moving again, it seems that the opposite of what they're saying on the throne speech, where they're going to increase the amount of flights into the island, we're seeing the opposite. If you look through what's happening in our winter schedule, you're having a hard time finding flights in and out of Bermuda. You've looked at New York, you say Boston's gone. In the wintertime, some days you're not going to get that New York flight. So you're having to figure out ways to get off the island, which impacts not just the industry of having tourists come into the island, but also Bermudians getting off the island for medical reasons and different things. This is something that is critical. The focus of not just the transport minister, but the tourism minister has to be us getting those flights coming in and out of Bermuda.
Now, James Collison just posted, got to ditch the testing for the vaccinated. What do you guys think about that as a way to increase people coming to the island? Ben?
Well,
or Susan, go ahead.
Go ahead.
yeah, the travel authorization form has been an Achilles heel for many of the travelers to and from Bermuda. And now that we're out of the real depths of COVID, it in my opinion would be time to rethink the whole travel authorization. I've only traveled a couple of times for over the summer period, and I was watching visitors that had entire families wanting to come to Bermuda that were at the gate and not able to get on the flight because they hadn't filled out the form appropriately. And I mean, in one case, I heard of a family that had actually submitted the forms for work permits. So, I mean, yes, maybe people need to navigate to, online platforms better, but the fact that the travel authorization form is the major Achilles heel in order to get into Bermuda, I believe at this point is getting a little out of touch with, with where we are with COVID, and that maybe it's time to simplify that process.
Okay. Crime, of course, and has been made the news with the number of murders and that have been happening recently, and of course the number of road traffic fatalities over the last few weeks have been horrific and very sad impact on a lot of people in Bermuda. The government has proposed having island-wide CCTV. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
So Don, the issue is, so yes, that is a tool that you can use. The problem is that if you look at the budgets over the last several years, the police have been being defunded each year that we've been moving forward. And we've been saying to them, as you start to take the money away from the police, what impact is this going to have on the country? And we're starting to see the results of that. If you're not giving the police all the tools that they need by not giving them the funding to staff at the level that they need to make sure that they have enough police officers, then what you start to see is they can't enforce at the same level. They can't show the same presence that they were showing before. And now we're starting to see that on our roads on an ongoing basis. Most of the time, everybody in the country has seen the behavior on the roads change significantly, and it's very negative. It's almost chaos on the roads. The people are overtaking on the inside, the outside, running red lights. There's a completely different way of people behavior on the roads, and specifically since the pandemic has happened, it seems like it's gotten worse. People have kind of changed their behavior and their thought process when they're on the roads. But that's one part. But you've also seen the gang violence increasing. You've seen the domestic violence increasing. You're seeing the kind of crimes. We've had a home invasion in this last week. We have to make sure that when we're trying to balance the budget, we cannot get rid of services that are protecting our country.
Susan, did you want to add anything?
This afternoon, there was a press conference, and the Minister of Transport was asked whether our road safety was a national emergency. And I believe that it is time for us to consider putting together a task force of cross ministries, the Bermuda Road Council, Road Safety Council, etc., and that it is time for us to consider this a real emergency. And we need to go much further than being silent witnesses. This is, again, an opportunity for us to change the culture. There are certainly almost archaic rules and policies that are in the legislation, that are in the licensing procedures, the traffic handbooks, and it's time for us to change the rules and make our roads get a little bit more of sophistication around the roads. And I know that from a cultural perspective, it is going to be sad that we cannot necessarily be as friendly and hospitable and generous on the roads. But we do definitely need to consider the fact that it's going to be safer to have very set rules and enforce them.
Michael Brangland posts, the driving standards need to be improved. You don't need a discussion. Make our driving tests and training up to EU standards for a start. And Scott, I see you chuckling over there a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
You're muted.
I mean, I'm not sure how much more discussion is needed. What's needed is enforcement and also a change in mindset. If I may just go back, Dawn, to your earlier observation about the recent spate of crime. During the throne speech reply, the opposition leader said something which has still been resonating with me for the last 10 days or so since he gave the speech, or however long ago it was. And I had said to him, this is not who we are. And during his speech, he said, there are politicians saying this is not who we are, but this is who we are. This is who we've become. And, it's a very interesting question. We think back to Bermuda in the day when the idea of someone, being murdered by a gun was a rarity. And now it seems to be happening, and it seems to be happening everywhere. And it needs to stop. And it needs to stop on Front Street, and it needs to stop on Court Street as well. But it will only stop when we as a community decide that we together wish to stop it. So we need a change in mindset, I think, to deal with the horrors that we're witnessing and the tragedies that we're witnessing.
Don, just to follow on what Scott said about the mindset, we have seen our population become kind of numb to what's been happening. If you go back, it used to be that the crimes had started with baseball bats and machetes. That was the shocking piece that had happened to us, right? It was at a football game, it was at a cricket match. And then we progressed to stabbings, and then it moved, and now there's gun violence. And what's happened now, right? It's the same thing what Susan was just saying about on the roads. 15, 16, 17 people dying in a year. We're not blinking an eye anymore. People are getting shot. We're not blinking an eye anymore. That's a problem. We have to realize these are lives. The same way that in the early stages of the pandemic, we were shocked that 10, 12 people had died. And now we're in the hundreds. The same kind of, we're looking at it. It's a critical time when it comes to the pandemic. We have to understand that what's happening on our roads, that's a pandemic. What's happening in our neighborhoods with our young people dying and taking lives of other people and ending up in Westgate for their entire life, that's a pandemic. We have to treat all of it with the same emergency orders. We have to come up with solutions to change it, not 5 years from now, not waiting until another child dies. We have to do it right away.
Yeah, in the throne speech, I think the PLP are trying to address it with their youth employment strategy for 18 to 26-year-olds, to be given support and training for jobs in the economy. I know that they mentioned that, it's a cultural change in the sense of something that Susan's been mentioning a couple times tonight is, give them some hope, help them to be able to get a job. How do you think that this may help some of these situations?
So Don, just quickly on that, they talk about that one of the core issues is opportunity. So I understand that part, but it's a piece to this puzzle. A lot of what's happening with our young people needs to be dealt with at a much earlier age, where we are falling behind in what we're doing from an education system standpoint. We're falling behind on how we are supporting our young people. There are a lot of opportunities, but we have to actually put our young people in a position that they can take those opportunities, that we've developed them and developed the skills so they understand the opportunity that's in front of them, right? If you have somebody that's having a hard time with writing and reading, doing a job interview becomes a problem. If you don't understand time management, being on time for a job becomes a problem. And this is what we have to change. When you talk about a cultural change, we have to realize that we have to make our entire population accountable, personal accountability and community accountability. That change is what has to happen in order for us to take the opportunities that the government is talking about doing. You can create a bunch of jobs, but if our people can't do those jobs, then you've wasted that activity.
I guess which then would tie into the whole educational reform that's going on right now with the two, Berkeley and Cedar Bridge, being signature schools next year, playing a role in that.
Yeah, so we discussed this yesterday in the Senate. There's a perception in the country that public education is a complete failure. The problem with that blanket kind of thought is that there are a lot of our students that are doing really well in public schools, and they are striving and making it out on the other side and getting good jobs, but there's another part that's falling behind. So what you have to do is you have to understand that what you're fixing can't just be the bells and whistles and we're going to put new titles on things and set people up for that opportunity. You have to figure out what you're going to do at the very early stages, at preschool level, before preschool, when you're assessing children and realizing that maybe there's some kind of deficiency, there's some learning disability here. If they're close to that target line, we should be giving them support, because our birth rate is low. We can't afford for any of our children to fall behind. As I said yesterday, they're assessing our young men when they're in Westgate after it's too late, and finding out that they have learning disabilities, finding out that they've had childhood trauma. We have to go back to the beginning. Prevention is what is going to help us.
Okay. Susan or Scott, do you want to chime in on any of that conversation? No. Okay.
I absolutely agree with what Susan got.
No, go please, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with Ben. What we need to do is we need to have joined up thinking. We can't look at all these compartments as they go along. We need to look holistically at our young and how they grow up and the whole life path, right? They need support from beginning to maturity. And we also need joined up thinking in the sense that we need to identify jobs that are going to exist for them and make sure that they're getting the training for those jobs that exist. One of the problems we have is we have very talented Bermudians who are training in areas where there aren't jobs in Bermuda. Likewise, we have jobs in Bermuda where Bermudians aren't training. And that's just a data error. We need to look at the whole thing, the whole picture holistically with the data analysis, and say, what are we trying to create as a community? Where are the jobs going to be? Are we training our young for those jobs? And those are common sense questions, but they do need to be asked. And you can't just focus on things in silos, or you miss the big picture. Sorry, Susan, for cutting across.
No, I was interested in hearing your input there, and I completely agree that what both of you had said is very much what we're facing and what the challenges are.
Now, we know, like in the United States, they just passed an infrastructure bill. In our throne speech, we have two main infrastructure projects proposed, Tynes Bay and the St. George's Marina. Should they be the top priority, or should something else be targeted, or should something additional be targeted? Scott?
Right. Am I unmuted? You can hear me now.
Okay.
I think the marina is a solid idea. Like any of these ideas, the question is, how are we going to pay for it? And the devil is in the details, as they say. But the idea of revitalizing the St. George's Marina is an idea that's been around for a long time. I think it probably appeared in our platform for the election as well. I'm pretty sure it did. So I think we can all agree that that's an excellent idea. But the question is how do we achieve it and how do we pay for it? Tynes Bay is more complicated. We're talking about huge amounts of money. The figure that's been in the press, and I don't know the accuracy or not of it, is $150 million. We don't have $150 million lying around under the couch to put towards Tynes Bay. It's a shame that it's already become a political football. The first words out of the government's mouths were that it's the OBA's fault because we didn't do something about it in 2012. That's a bit silly. The question is, what is needed and how long can it survive? Obviously we need it as a functioning incinerator, but we need to know more specifics around it. A massive infrastructure project can be a very good idea if we have the money to pay for it, because it creates jobs for Bermudians and it enhances our infrastructure. But a massive infrastructure project, if we don't have the money to pay for it, just increase our debt. And our debt, as you'll know, Don, is already at $3.35 billion. So I commended the Minister of Finance for his suggestion that we look at public-private partnerships, because we need to find ways to pay for the things that we need when we don't have the money to pay for them. So I'm just a little concerned that it's a very, very large number in respect of Tynes Bay. Obviously, we're not in the government. We don't have the details as to how necessary or not necessary it is, how immediate it is, or how not immediate it is. But it's a large number, and we're going to need to hear more.
I know, like public-private partnership is put out there, and then we always hear the criticisms afterwards with the airport, with the hospital. So one for each government if we wanted to keeping a tally there. How do we get public buy-in on this? Because after they see it, then they always see the negatives.
Well, the difficult thing with the incinerator project is that it is not something that you're going to see, right? People get rid of their garbage and they don't really think about what happens to it after that point, right? So the problem with this $150 million is that it is not going to turn into sustainable jobs after it's completed, right? So where we are in a situation where we are having a hard time employing our people, the cost of living is going up significantly. People are struggling, and they're going to look and say, well, we're going to spend $150 million on our trash. They're not going to understand this connection, and that's the problem with it. You know, the comment for me is Bermuda has to start to do a better job taking care of the items that we do have, right? So if you build a brand new school, you have to have a maintenance program that actually is implemented, and somebody's checking after the people that are supposed to be maintaining it and making sure that it happens. Like, the accountability from that standpoint is important, because how many times do we see that something gets built and then 10 years down the road, we're saying that it's broken? Yes, things will start to go after an extended period of time, but if you take really good care of them, they last longer than they're supposed to. People that don't have a lot of money take really good care of their car because they can't afford to buy a new one. Bermuda is in that same spot. We don't have that great amount of money to just spend whenever we want. You know, the infrastructure project that the US is doing, they're printing money. We don't have that ability to do that. So we have to make sure that what we're spending our money on is going to be value for money. And then after we do that, we have to make sure we maintain it at a level that is going to allow it to last.
Susan, do you want to add anything to that as well?
Yes, well, as mentioned earlier, my concentration really is making sure that the employment and the jobs are there. So when we look at projects like the St. George's Marina, you know, that opens up a wide variety of opportunity for jobs, everything that you can imagine in a marina environment. But I am a little concerned, as my colleague has mentioned before, about projects such as the Tynes Bay sanitation. It does not necessarily, the revamping or rebuilding of that does not attract additional long-term career jobs. And you know, what's the real return for the investor? So I'm not sure how confident I am about that, and that it could end up costing Bermuda, both in jobs as well as in a financial having to pay back. But, you know, we just have to see what the government chooses.
So we head into our last 15 minutes here. Susan, there was a couple things mentioned in the throne speech: strengthening the protection for children and strengthening protection for seniors, in particular for financial abuse. What are your thoughts?
Well, the government in the past, certainly the 2020 throne speech, spent an awful lot of time or dedicated time to an office of the public guardian. And there has been absolutely no mention of that, to my knowledge, in the throne speech for 2021. And that would be a really good place to start. And I mention that because bringing in protections for children, there are a number of pieces of legislation that would need to be amended in order to facilitate having legislation around an office for the public guardian. And if those other pieces of legislation are amended, at that time, we could look at additional protections for children. I know that Scott has been concentrating a good bit of time in DCFS, and he may be able to shed a little more light on some of the protections for children.
Sure, I'm happy to do so, Susan. I mean, we have lamentably seen great difficulties at the Department of Child and Family Services. There are allegations of abuse and neglect. They are long running. We had situations with Bermudian children being sent overseas to, one might uncharitably call them in certain cases borstals, but certainly to institutions, some of which have been closed. This is concerning. We, the opposition, called for an independent investigation into that, carried out by a judge or a legal representative. That didn't happen. I think that's regrettable. I think that would have been an opportunity for Bermuda as a community as a whole to deal with the issue. We do know that the throne speech has proposed some strengthening of child safeguard laws. We don't know what that looks like yet, but I know that there's been a panel of international specialists involved, and we very much look forward to seeing that. But that, of course, doesn't deal with the issues that are still very real for parents and children in Bermuda.
I want to touch on sports for a bit, Ben, with you. Government has said more money for Bermuda's elite athletes will be made available. What do you think about this? And are these athletes be getting this money, or should it be for the ones up and coming?
Well, so the first thing, obviously, for me is that I'd just be happy to see that the budget for sports would move, because it's been moving in the wrong direction for multiple governments. So it's going to be interesting, as I said to the minister yesterday, at a time when the Minister of Finance is trying to get to a balanced budget and a surplus budget, and you've seen that the funding to the police has moved in the wrong direction. It's going to be, he's going to have a difficult task to try to get some of that money. I know that there's been some discussion potentially on a sports lottery. There's some ways of trying to get some funding in. I will say that some of the initiatives that are coming out of youth and sport now, when it comes to a youth policy and potentially looking at how we can make some adjustments to what's happening with our elite athletes and developing athletes, and looking at trying to get athletes to the point where they can get scholarships to university. I think all of those would be really positive, and I'm looking forward to see the details that come out with these kind of broad ideas.
Because they also discussed about having a national sports policy. How do you see that taking shape and making a difference?
I've had some initial conversations with the minister about it. I think that everything's at the early stages. There's just ideas that have been put out. The fact that we are starting to have that conversation, I'm actually happy that we're moving in that direction, because I think that as a country that supports our athletes when they reach the top level, the way we've supported Flora coming back with that gold medal, shows that we could be a sporting nation, but now we have to show that support to develop our athletes so that we can follow the path that Flora has just blazed for us.
Okay, thank you. Scott, lawyerly type question. We sort of had this phrase put into the throne speech, but with no real explanation as to what it means. It says the government's looking to make changes or amendments to the Bermuda Constitution. Do you have any idea what that's going to be?
Well, we don't have any idea what it's going to be, because government hasn't said it. It's a very cryptic comment. It probably is cryptic intentionally, so that people who want to interpret it in a certain way can interpret it in a certain way, and perhaps draw some hope from that. One could speculate. Does it mean something to do with independence? Does it mean something to do with the Senate, which the PLP seem to be rather unhappy with of late, because it actually puts some brakes on the runaway train? I think it's regrettable that if you're going to make fundamental constitutional changes to the island, and you're going to suggest it as part of your government's legislative agenda, that you don't actually say what you mean. The public of Bermuda shouldn't be left in the dark and shouldn't be left to guess what is meant. So I think it is regrettable how that's been handled. If they fundamentally believe that there's a constitutional change to Bermuda that is necessary and should be implemented, then why not have the courage to say what it is?
Okay. A couple more things before we give you guys a chance to have a last word. talking about the economic recovery plan for Bermuda, one of the things they talked about was extending the economic empowerment zone in Hamilton and creating more residential developments within the city. Scott, how do you feel like that's going to work?
Well, I mean, I think that the idea of economic empowerment zone is a good one. And I know that in our throne speech reply, the theme that was resonating there is why not look at the eastern and western ends of the islands and consider economic empowerment zones for Somerset or St. George's, because both of our extremities are struggling greatly. In terms of North Hamilton, I think the thing in the throne speech that perhaps made some cause for concern was the suggestion that there was going to be residential development funded in some way by the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, the BEDC. The BEDC, Don, as you and your listeners will be aware, is intended to assist Bermudian entrepreneurialism, small and medium-sized businesses, help good ideas get off the ground to allow business entrepreneurs to succeed and flourish in Bermuda. It's been a pretty good scheme. It worked well back under the OBA, where Nick Kemp was running the BEDC. And it is exactly where I think the focus should be, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial activities in Bermuda, and that really is perhaps the way of the future for a large segment of our population. And so the idea, I think, that you would take money away from that and pivot to potentially a residential development in North Hamilton, I'm just not sure that that's been thought through. It would have detriments to the BEDC and to our entrepreneurial economy, which may be well outweighed by any benefit of additional housing that might be built.
Right. Now, I do believe there are economic empowerment zones for Somerset and St. George's. It just wasn't highlighted in this throne speech.
And they certainly were not afforded the same leniency and sort of further development that the North Hamilton has been given according to the throne speech.
Okay.
Now, Don, just a quick addition to that. Scott was talking about the residential and where potential money was coming from, but the other concept is that you're going to be looking for private enterprise to go in and spend money in this area to build residential buildings. The question becomes, you have to be careful with what that looks like. Are you looking at gentrification? Are you looking at, if somebody goes in and spends a ton of money, because let's be honest, construction in Bermuda is not inexpensive.
Right.
So if you're going to build a residential building, doesn't matter what part of the country it's in, that cost is that cost. Well, then what tends to happen is, what level of income person is going to be able to afford the building that's been created? So the same issue that we looked at when you talk about an airport, if somebody puts an investment in, they're going to want their return. That return is not going to be at a low level. You're not expecting somebody to invest millions of dollars to build a building and then give out rents that are going to be extremely affordable. It's not, that's the balancing act. So what happens is, if you start to do that and now you're changing that direction in that area, are you moving the people that have been part of North Hamilton for generations out of that area? So you just have to be careful of what that does and how it's handled.
That's the whole catch-22 of the situation. I know when the initial proposals were for North Hamilton, we saw those posts on social media talking about gentrification and about moving people out and moving other people in as they make changes.
Yes.
One of the things, we just finished COP26, and part of the economic recovery plan is to attract developers of renewable energy to test their products in Bermuda. What do you guys think about that? And we'll start with you, Susan.
Yes, so for me, I just feel as though there are two concepts here that are kind of merged together. So we've got the one idea that there would be folks that would come to Bermuda, research and development, and they would, sort of either go out exploring our oceans and building wind turbines and testing them, which is a very scary thought to me, because if it doesn't work, Bermuda is then left with, rusty wind turbines sitting out in the middle of the ocean. The other side of it is that there could be investors, research and development that is done on products that would be available to Bermuda, to Bermudians, that would improve our standard of living, reduce our energy use, and we would be the test market to see what the behaviors are like for these new products or the like, because Bermuda is probably a really good test market for a number of reasons. So if that's the case, then I believe that we could come up with a structure that would allow investors or research and development to take place in Bermuda. Bermudians would test these products and give their response and their reactions, etc. But the idea that people would sort of over in a sandbox or over to the side just come here and test things, I believe we would be left with a legacy that could, fall into the category of the dead junkyard. And that would be a horrible situation for us.
Okay. Ben or Scott, either one of you want to add to that?
I just think there's more details that we need to hear. When it sounds like an idea that might bear fruit, but we just don't know enough about it. I mean, let's be honest. Bermuda's a very expensive jurisdiction. It doesn't really lend itself to being a place for you to go to test something that you're looking to make money on in the future. That means that you might not have the ability to have that money now. So there's just some pieces to that puzzle that we would have to have some answers to before we can really give a proper comment on it.
I mean, one example that had come up a couple of years ago is sort of the idea that everyone would be given some sort of solar paneling on their roofs. So, you just have it put on your roof, and the idea would then be how to set up a system for, one, repayment for the solar panel being put on your roof, and then also the efficiencies around the costs of electricity, given that there is solar power now integrated into the home, and just testing how that works and whether it really does work. So I do believe that there are some products out there, especially in the environmental climate genre, that would allow for some interesting testing here. But again, it's all in the details.
Well, our 45 minutes have gone shooting on past us like a race car, and I want to give you all a chance to have a last say. Something about the budget maybe I didn't ask you about that you want to discuss, and we'll start with you, Scott.
Well, I mean, I think we all have to realize where we are right now. We're in a very, very difficult spot, and we're going to have to solve those problems, and we're going to have to work together to solve those problems. But I think we need to focus on the big issues in front of us, right in front of us. How do we attract inward foreign investment? How do we fundamentally tackle comprehensive immigration reform? How do we cut the cost of government? I mean, those are the big issues that we really need to focus on, in addition, of course, to the health pandemic. But, we need to try to revitalize and restore our economy so that we can have the money in Bermuda to spend to deal with other very, very real problems. Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Ben, your last word.
Yeah, to me, I think we have to get to the point where we're not just making plans and putting out ideas. We've heard in the past that we are going to reduce the cost of healthcare, and the population has just received bills that tell them that healthcare is going up. We've heard that we're going to reduce the cost of power, and the Belco bills have gone up. The country is in a point where our citizens need to find a way to reduce the cost of living, because most people haven't had raises in a long time. There's a lot of people that are unemployed. To me, one of the things that was really missing was how we were going to take care of the third sector, who's been taking care of our population during this pandemic. The government has put out that they potentially will find a way to get them loans. Understanding for a charity to go out and take a loan to then give free food to people is just a concept that is broken, could never work, should never even be suggested. We have to figure out a better way to take care of our vulnerable population. And right now, in what we are going through as a country, we have to do our best to take care of the people that are taking care of our citizens.
Thank you. And Susan, you get the last word tonight.
Well, I would add to what Ben has said when he mentioned that the vulnerable come first. We have all been through such a trauma through COVID, and we've got a lot to deal with right now. And I believe that the focus on our people, to focus on healing, a focus on being able to change behaviors, because we have all been so isolated from each other, that this gives us a really good time for the government to take a closer look at its policies, definitely focus on the various people within the population, and heal. We really need to heal.
All right. Thank you very much. I just want to apologize. I think I've said budget a couple of times tonight. And of course, it's a throne speech. So just correct myself there and slap myself on the wrist for getting ahead of myself, looking forward down to another 4 months away. Again, we just want to thank Scott Pearman for being here tonight, Ben Smith, and Susan Jackson. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
And for all our viewers, we're wishing you a very beautiful evening.